This video can be watched in conjunction with an earlier video entitled Tips to Work Smarter and Access Higher Grades. In that video, I give advice on how to produce detailed language analysis without falling into the trap of making points that are too general to earn enough credit for grades higher than a 4 or a 5. In this video, I'm going to look at how to draft a response which stays on the text with a laser-sharp focus at all times. In order to illustrate the points I'm going to make, we're going to look at a short extract from a speech given in the 19th century by a gentleman who wants to persuade an audience of his peers to engage with him in a fight to get a basic education provided by the state for all children. And my own model answer, which addresses the question, how does the writer use language in this speech to influence his audience? Friends and colleagues, I must first describe my sincerest gratitude for your attendance here today. It is the greatest honour to welcome so many intellectuals into my humble home. Knowing you all to be wise and influential persons, I have asked you here in the hope that we will concur on an issue of great importance. Gentlemen, you cannot fail to have perceived the overwhelming number of illiterate and uneducated children amongst the poor in our fair city. For when mother and father must work in the factories from the break of day until the skies turn dark, who will spare a moment to teach poor Tommy his ABCs? And, lacking this simple knowledge, how can poor Tommy hope to liberate himself from the poverty and crime by which he is surrounded? In ignoring the plight of these small children, we condemn them to a life of hunger and want. My esteemed friends, the solution to these problems is but a simple one. We must turn our attentions to establishing a unified system of education in this country. I move that we petition our national parliament to pass a law that will make mandatory a basic education in reading and writing for all young children, be they rich or poor. This may well be a long fight, indeed it may be a difficult fight, but our cause is just and for the greater good of all, and so we must, with all our hearts, persevere. Now here's my own drafted response, which is not designed to exhaustively answer the question. I haven't made all the points here that could be made. Instead, I'll be using it to show you how keeping your answer specifically tied to the text works in practice. I've also highlighted the terminology I have used in green and the quotations in pink so that you can see how I incorporate these into my writing. The speaker begins by directly addressing his audience as friends and colleagues, which he perhaps hopes will create a warm and welcoming atmosphere where there are like-minded individuals who are able to work together. He expresses his sincerest gratitude for their attendance and describes them as intellectuals who are wise and influential. The way in which he tells them that he is greatly honoured by their presence, and his other comments that are designed to appeal to their vanity, are indications that his objective is to use flattery to make them receptive to listening to his appeal to join his crusade for universal education. Now that the speaker has got his audience into an open frame of mind, his next objective is to present, as he sees it, the problem of the cycle of illiteracy, poverty, and criminality. To achieve this, he employs two back-to-back rhetorical questions with a cause and effect relationship that have the implicit negative answers "no one" and "he can't." His use of emotive language is designed to get his audience to feel sympathy by creating a picture of mother and father who must work from the break of day until the skies turn dark. They are not negligent, he argues. They would teach poor Tommy his ABCs, if only there were enough physical hours in the day. By putting a name on a single child with whom his audience can now identify, he humanises and individualises the otherwise faceless poor. His switch to using the first-person plural personal pronoun we in the phrase "we condemn them" at this point in his speech creates a sense of collective responsibility in his audience. By doing nothing, he implies that they are all guilty of effectively imprisoning these people for a life sentence of hunger and want. The speaker's tone dramatically changes in the third paragraph. Now that he has hopefully won them over, he dispenses with the emotive language, at last bluntly addressing the action that he wants them to take. The simplicity of his tone reflects and enhances the simplicity of his solution, which is to petition our national parliament to pass a law for the provision of a universal basic literacy education. In my many years of teaching and tutoring students, I have seen time and time again that students do not make enough specific reference to the text under discussion. Sometimes it feels as though they are so focused on labelling features with terminology that they overlook the bigger picture of what the writer is trying to communicate. What then happens is that you get a disjointed list of language features and terminology, accompanying quotations that have been completely taken out of their original context. And without this context, the examiner is unable to get a sense of your overall understanding of the text as a cohesive and coherent whole. A piece of writing is more than just a sum of its parts. If we just list language features, we lose the sense of impact that the piece has on us as a whole. It's like looking at certain sections of a picture in isolation without being able to appreciate the whole image, so that we see this instead of this. I'll give you an example of what I mean. The writer starts off by using direct address, your, to refer to the audience. This makes the audience feel that his message is more personal and that his speech is directed at them individually. This analysis is not in itself wrong, although it would only earn limited credit. If we look back at the speech, we can see that the writer does indeed begin by directly addressing his audience. Your is an indication of direct address, and speech writers do indeed do this to make their message more personal. What it doesn't do, though, is give either detail or context which relates to this text and this text only. For example, to what does the your refer specifically? In fact, this analysis could just as easily be made about any other speech which has at its beginning the word your, which is why it won't get very many marks. We'll compare this response with my own later in the video. I think we as teachers, and I include myself here, have been guilty of not emphasising enough when we teach you that a technique such as direct address enables a speaker to make their speech more personal because the audience feels they are being spoken to as individuals, that this is not a ready-made analysis that you can just cut and paste into your essay wherever you identify it being used. It should be seen more as a starting place, as information that gives you understanding in order to point you and your analysis of the specific effect of the language in the right direction. It's often the words surrounding you and your that have more potential for analysis. Everything you write, including your analysis, needs to specifically refer to the text, but this is achieved in different ways. I'm going to use the terms indirect reference, i.e. your own take on what the writer is saying in your own words, and direct reference, i.e. the actual words that the writer uses in the form of quotations. Well-written responses seamlessly move from one to the other and back again, but the overwhelming majority of what you write should be indirect reference. Indirect textual references should answer some or all of the following questions. From which part of the text does a quotation you're going to talk about come? What is the writer implying? Or in other words, what is the writer getting at? What does the writer hope to achieve? Where, how and why does the writer shift their tone? How does this section link to what has come before? What do we, as readers, infer? Or in other words, what do we understand? What is a summary of what the writer is saying in my own words? If we return to my model answer, we can see that my indirect reference to the text here answers a number of these questions. In this first highlighted part, I provide a bridge between the analysis that has just come before and the analysis I am about to make, to show that my understanding of the second paragraph is informed by my understanding of the objectives of the first. I'm demonstrating that I appreciate how this text works at a structural level, that the speaker needs to warm his audience up first so that they are prepared to listen to what he is asking them to do. In the second highlighted part, all I have done is summarise, in my own words, my understanding of the problem he sets out. Direct reference to the text, or quotations, can be included in two ways. They can either stand alone or be embedded in indirect reference. I tend to incorporate stand-alone quotations when I'm doing very detailed analysis of a particular word or phrase. If we return to my model answer, we can see an example of where I have included a stand-alone quotation after I have labelled it. The rest of my analysis is highlighted in bold. Note that it includes indirect reference to the text, where I give my own take on what the writer is using language to achieve. And it's actually the word condemn, used in conjunction with the pronoun we, that is the focus of my analysis, not the pronoun we in isolation. The majority of your quotations should be embedded in indirect reference to the text. Effective embedding of quotations means that they fit in seamlessly with your analysis so that the whole sentence makes grammatical sense. Let's look at an example from my model answer. The quotations mother and father, from the break of day until the skies turn dark, and poor Tommy his ABCs, are embedded into my analysis, which I do through indirect reference to the text. Here I'm linking the effect on the reader with how this is achieved. And finish by putting what he has said in my own words along with another embedded quotation. Make sure that you pick fairly short quotations, i.e. a key word or phrase that gives a flavour of the text, or one that you specifically want to go on to analyse. One way to check that you have embedded your quotation correctly is to temporarily remove the quotation marks and read the sentence back to yourself. If it reads fluently, then you have embedded it properly. They would teach poor Tommy his ABCs if only there were enough physical hours in the day. What happens though if the quotation refuses to fit into your sentence grammatically? I came across that problem in my own response when I wanted to embed the speaker's words greatest honour. The word greatest is an adjective, but in my sentence I wanted to use it as an adverb, which would involve removing the est suffix and adding ly. And the word honour is an abstract noun, but in my sentence I wanted to use it as an adjective, which would involve adding ed to make it honoured. You can totally do this, but you need to acknowledge what you add or take away by enclosing it in square brackets. Finally, let's return to our analysis from the beginning of the speech. As we can see, this contains barely any reference to the text at all, be it direct or indirect. The word your is taken completely out of its context. We don't know to what it's referring. If we look back at the extract, we can see that it actually refers to attendance, probably the phrase which is least interesting and least worthy of analysis in the whole sentence. The second sentence makes no indirect reference to the text at all. It's so generic that it could be said of any number of texts. Now let's have a look at my model answer, which deals with the same part of the text. The speaker begins by directly addressing his audience as friends and colleagues, which he perhaps hopes will create a warm and welcoming atmosphere where there are like-minded individuals who are able to work together. He expresses his sincerest gratitude for their attendance and describes them as intellectuals who are wise and influential. The way in which he tells them that he is greatly honoured by their presence and his other comments that are designed to appeal to their vanity are indications that his objective is to use flattery to make them receptive to listening to his appeal to join his crusade for universal education. Although you and your are indicators of direct address, they are not the only ones. Ladies and gentlemen is a popular one, but here the speaker settles for friends and colleagues, and I found that this has far more potential for analysis than your. We need to ask ourselves, why does he address them in this way? Friends are people who tend to build relationships because they have things such as values in common, and colleagues are people who work together. All qualities which are very valuable to highlight for the speaker's purposes. Here I just use my knowledge of the definitions of these words to aid my analysis. In my next sentence, I summarise his words, embedding what I feel are the key quotations that I'm going to refer to in my next sentence. Note how instead of listing quotations, I create a descriptive summary of this part of the text. In this third sentence, I give my take on the effect of his choice of vocabulary, and finish by referring to the subject of his speech. Not one of these sentences could be applied to another text, and so none is wasted. So in summary, guidance on the effects of particular language features are starting points for analysis, not endpoints. Avoid writing sentences that are so generic they could be applied to any text. Ask yourself, have I written a very similar sounding sentence about another text before? If so, be brutal and get rid of it. Always make sure you are referring to the text in question, either indirectly or directly. Don't jump around all over the text. Provide bridges between your analysis so that your examiner or teacher sees that you understand how the text works as a whole. Make sure you give quotations enough context. Check that quotations are embedded correctly. Sentences should read fluently without the quotation marks there. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments section below and I'll do my best to answer them. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more videos on English language topics and exam techniques and English literature texts.